One of her twins needed a donor, but the only match was the Millionaire CEO who shattered her heart. "Mrs. Carter, I'm afraid we've found a compatible donor," Dr. Martinez said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of relief and concern that made Emma's stomach clench with unexpected dread. Emma looked up from where she'd been holding 5-year-old Lily's hand as her daughter slept fitfully in the hospital bed, the latest round of chemotherapy having left her exhausted and pale. "That's wonderful news. When can we schedule the procedure?" "Well, there's something unusual about this situation," Dr. Martinez continued, glancing at his clipboard with an expression that suggested the news wasn't as straightforward as Emma had hoped. "The donor has agreed to the procedure, but there are some complications regarding the coordination of care." "What kind of complications?" Emma asked, though something in the doctor's tone made her suspect this wasn't about medical logistics. "The donor is someone you know, Mrs. Carter. Someone you specifically requested we contact if he was ever identified as a potential match." Emma's blood turned to ice water in her veins. There was only one person she'd ever mentioned to the medical team. Only one name she'd given them in a moment of desperate maternal instinct overriding 5 years of pride and pain. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady beep of Lily's monitors. "Please tell me it's not. Alexander Stone has been confirmed as a perfect bone marrow match for Lily," Dr. Martinez said gently. "He's already completed the preliminary testing and has agreed to proceed with the donation. He'll be here tomorrow morning to discuss the timeline and coordinate the procedure." Before we dive deeper into this impossible situation that will test everything you believe about love, forgiveness, and a mother's desperation, tell us where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you already feeling the weight of Emma's impossible choice? Drop it in the comments. We love connecting with our Lux Love Chronicles family, who understand that sometimes life forces us to face our greatest pain to find our greatest healing. Now, let me take you back to how we got to this moment, because to understand why the name Alexander Stone hits Emma like a physical blow, you need to know about the love affair that destroyed her faith in fairy tales and the secret she's been carrying for 5 years. But first, let me explain how we got to this medical miracle that feels more like a cruel twist of fate. 3 weeks earlier, when 5-year-old Lily Carter had collapsed during dance class, Emma had initially thought it was just exhaustion. Her daughter had always been the more delicate of the twins, where Sophie was robust and energetic. Lily was thoughtful and tired easily. But when the bruises appeared overnight and Lily's fever spiked to dangerous levels, Emma had rushed her to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia with the kind of bone-deep terror only mothers understand. The diagnosis had hit like a lightning strike: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The most common form of childhood cancer, Dr. Martinez had explained, but also the most treatable when caught early. Lily would need aggressive chemotherapy followed by a bone marrow transplant to ensure the cancer never returned. The good news is that siblings are often perfect matches, Dr. Martinez had said during that first devastating consultation. "We'll test Sophie immediately." But Sophie, despite being Lily's identical twin, had not been a match. The genetic lottery that had made them look exactly alike had somehow failed to provide the bone marrow compatibility that could save Lily's life. "How is that possible?" Emma had asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. "They're identical twins. While identical twins share most of their DNA, the specific markers that determine bone marrow compatibility can sometimes differ," Dr. Martinez had explained patiently. "It's rare, but it happens. We'll immediately begin searching the National Bone Marrow Registry for other potential donors." That search had led nowhere. Week after week, as Lily's condition stabilized but didn't improve, the calls came back negative. No matches in the United States. No matches internationally. The combination of genetic markers that made Lily unique also made finding a compatible donor nearly impossible. It was during the 3rd week of searching, when Emma was exhausted from sleeping in hospital chairs and managing Sophie's confusion about why her sister was so sick, that she'd made a decision that had cost her every ounce of pride she possessed. "Dr. Martinez," she'd said during one of their daily consultations, "there's someone else you should test. Someone who might be genetically compatible. A family member we haven't considered?" Emma had taken a shaky breath, knowing that speaking his name aloud would open a door she'd kept locked for 5 years. "Alexander Stone. He might share genetic markers with the girls. Dr. Martinez had looked confused. Is he related to you? A cousin, or he's their father? Emma had said quietly, the words feeling like broken glass in her throat. But he doesn't know they exist. That admission had led to the most difficult conversation of Emma's life. Explaining to the medical team that she'd raised twins alone for 5 years without the father's knowledge. Revealing that Alexander Stone, the Alexander Stone, CEO of Stone Technology Solutions, worth approximately $2.8 billion, had no idea he'd fathered children during their brief, secret affair 6 years ago. Mrs. Carter, Dr. Martinez had said carefully, if Mr. Stone is the children's biological father, there's a very good chance he could be a compatible donor. But we need his permission to test him, and given the circumstances, that might be complicated. I know, Emma had replied, staring at her hands to avoid meeting the doctor's sympathetic gaze. But Lily needs a donor, and if there's even a chance he could help her, I have to try. What Emma hadn't known was that Alexander Stone had been registered in the National Bone Marrow Donor Database for 3 years. He'd enrolled during a corporate charity drive after his business partner's 8-year-old son had been diagnosed with leukemia. It had been a gesture of solidarity, a way to support his grieving friend, never imagining that his donation might one day save a life, especially not the life of a child he didn't know existed. When the registry's sophisticated matching system had identified Alexander as a potential donor for a 5-year-old patient in Philadelphia, he'd received a standard phone call from the donation center. Mr. Stone, this is Janet from the National Marrow Donor Program. We have a pediatric patient who appears to be a preliminary match for your genetic markers. Would you be willing to undergo additional testing to confirm compatibility? Alexander had agreed immediately, just as he had when he'd first registered. The testing had been conducted at a lab near his Manhattan office, and he'd thought nothing more about it until the call came confirming he was indeed a perfect match. The patient is a 5-year-old girl with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Janet had explained. The procedure would involve bone marrow extraction, which requires general anesthesia and a brief hospital stay, but most donors recover completely within a few weeks. When do we schedule it? Alexander had asked without hesitation. There's one unusual aspect to this case, Mr. Stone. The patient's mother has specifically requested to meet with you before the procedure. Normally, donor and recipient families remain anonymous, but she's invoked the emergency family consultation protocol. Alexander had been puzzled but agreeable. Whatever the family needs. When and where? That conversation had been 2 days ago. Alexander had no idea that in agreeing to meet the patient's family, he was about to come face to face with the woman who'd haunted his dreams for 5 years and discover he was about to save the life of his own daughter. If you've ever wondered how far a mother would go to save her child, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button because what happens next will test every belief you have about love, forgiveness, and second chances. To understand why Alexander Stone's name could reduce Emma Carter to a trembling mess in a hospital corridor, you need to know about the love affair that had shaped both their lives 6 years ago, when Emma had been a 26-year-old executive assistant and Alexander had been a 32-year-old tech mogul on the rise. Emma had started working for Stone Technology Solutions fresh out of business school, drawn by the company's innovative approach to cybersecurity and Alexander's reputation as a visionary leader. She'd been hired as an executive assistant, but her MBA and quick intelligence had soon made her indispensable to Alexander's daily operations. Their relationship had begun professionally and remained that way for nearly 8 months. Alexander was focused, demanding, brilliant, and completely dedicated to building his company into a major player in the tech industry. Emma had admired his drive, his strategic mind, and his ability to see technological possibilities that others missed. She'd also been attracted to him physically, though she'd never allowed herself to acknowledge it. Alexander Stone was tall and lean, with dark hair that he ran his hands through when he was thinking, green eyes that seemed to see through every corporate facade, and an intensity that made even routine business meetings feel electric. The shift in their relationship had happened gradually, then all at once. Late nights working on product launches had turned into shared dinners at his office. Business trips had become opportunities for long conversations about everything from market strategies to childhood dreams. Emma had found herself looking forward to Monday mornings because they meant seeing Alexander again. The first time he'd kissed her had been after a particularly successful client presentation. They'd been alone in the conference room, celebrating the multi-million-dollar contract they'd just secured, when Alexander had suddenly cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a passion that had taken her breath away. "I've wanted to do that for months," he'd whispered against her lips. "Alexander, we can't." Emma had begun, but he'd kissed her again, and all her professional reservations had dissolved under the intensity of feelings she'd been suppressing for too long. Their affair had lasted 10 months, conducted in secret due to company policies and the significant difference in their positions. Alexander had been careful to ensure their professional relationship remained pristine, no favoritism, no inappropriate behavior in the office, no hint that their after-hours connection existed. But privately, they'd been inseparable. Alexander had shown Emma a side of himself that few people ever saw: vulnerable, thoughtful, surprisingly romantic. He'd cooked dinner for her in his penthouse apartment, had listened to her dreams of eventually starting her own consulting firm, had made her feel like she was his partner in both business and life. Emma had fallen completely, desperately in love with him. She'd imagined a future where they could be public about their relationship, where she might transition into a more senior role at the company, where they might build something lasting together. She'd been naive about the realities of dating a billionaire. The beginning of the end had come when Alexander's company had caught the attention of Ashworth Industries, a family-owned conglomerate looking to expand into technology. The potential merger would have valued Stone Technology at $1.2 billion and would have made Alexander one of the youngest tech moguls in the country. But the Ashworth family had old-fashioned ideas about business partnerships. They wanted to see Alexander settled, stable, connected to the right social circles. They'd made it clear that the merger would be smoother if Alexander were married to someone who understood the responsibilities that came with generational wealth. Enter Victoria Ashworth, daughter of the company's founder, beautiful in the way that expensive breeding and personal trainers could create, educated at the finest schools, and groomed from birth to be the perfect wife for a powerful man. Emma had known something was wrong when Alexander had started canceling their dinner plans, when their late-night conversations had become brief and professional, when he'd looked at her with something that seemed almost like guilt during business meetings. The truth had come out on a Thursday evening in March when Emma had arrived at Alexander's penthouse with Chinese takeout and plans to celebrate the preliminary merger agreements. She'd found him sitting at his kitchen counter with a bottle of expensive scotch and an expression that had made her stomach drop with dread. "Emma, we need to talk," he'd said, his voice carrying the tone of a man about to deliver a death sentence. "About the merger? I saw the preliminary numbers, and they're incredible. About us," Alexander had interrupted. "About this relationship." Emma had set down the bag of food with hands that were already beginning to shake. "What about us?" "It has to end. Tonight." The words had hit her like physical blows. "I don't understand. Yesterday you said you loved me. Yesterday you talked about us taking a vacation together after the merger was finalized. Yesterday I was living in a fantasy," Alexander had replied, his voice cold in a way she'd never heard before. "Today I'm facing reality." "What reality?" "The reality that you're my assistant, and I'm about to become one of the most powerful men in the tech industry. The reality that what we have, whatever we have, isn't sustainable at the level I'm moving toward." Emma had stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who'd held her so tenderly just the night before. "Alexander, if this is about the company policies, we can figure that out. I can find another position, or we can disclose the relationship to HR. This isn't about company policies, Emma. This is about compatibility. About what works in the real world versus what works in the bubble we've been living in. I don't understand what you're saying." Alexander had drained his scotch glass before meeting her eyes with a look that had shattered something fundamental inside her chest. "I'm saying that people like me don't end up with people like you. Not in the long term. Not when there are business considerations and family expectations and social responsibilities that go beyond what two people feel in private moments. People like me," Emma had repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're wonderful, Emma. You're intelligent and beautiful, and you've been an incredible partner in every way. But you come from a different world. You don't understand the pressures that come with generational wealth, the social obligations, the strategic marriages that strengthen business empires rather than just satisfying personal desires. Each word had been like a knife between her ribs. Strategic marriages? Victoria Ashworth and I will be announcing our engagement next month. The merger will be finalized 6 weeks after the wedding. Emma had gripped the kitchen counter to keep from falling. You're marrying someone else. I'm marrying someone who understands the responsibilities that come with my position. Someone who can be a true partner in building the kind of legacy I want to create. And I can't be that person. Alexander had looked away, unable to meet her eyes. You knew this was temporary, Emma. We both knew that eventually, I need to make choices based on more than just what we felt for each other. No, Emma had said, her voice growing stronger with anger and disbelief. I didn't know this was temporary. I thought we were building something real. I thought you loved me. I do love you. That's what makes this so difficult. If you loved me, you wouldn't be throwing me away for a business deal. I'm not throwing you away. I'm being realistic about what's possible and what isn't. Emma had grabbed her purse and headed for the door, needing to escape before the tears that were building in her chest could humiliate her further. Emma, wait. Alexander had called after her. We still need to work together. The merger will take months to complete, and I need you too. You need me to what? She turned back to face him, her pain finally transforming into the kind of rage that could burn through anything. Help you plan your wedding? Coordinate meetings with your fiancé? Pretend that everything between us meant nothing. I need you to be professional about this. To understand that business has to come first. Business comes first, Emma had repeated slowly. Always business first with you, isn't it, Alexander? Even when it comes to love. Love doesn't pay for the lifestyle you've been enjoying, Emma. Love doesn't build companies or create jobs or change industries. And love apparently doesn't matter when there's money to be made. She'd left that night and had submitted her resignation the next morning. 2 weeks later, she'd discovered she was pregnant. Emma had stared at the positive pregnancy test in the bathroom of her small apartment, her hands shaking as the implications had crashed over her. She was carrying Alexander Stone's baby, the baby of a man who'd made it brutally clear that she wasn't worth choosing over a business opportunity. Her first instinct had been to call him, to tell him about the pregnancy, to hope that discovering he was going to be a father might change his perspective about what mattered most. But then she'd remembered his words. People like me don't end up with people like you. Emma had realized that telling Alexander about the pregnancy would force him into an impossible situation. He'd either feel trapped into abandoning his merger and engagement, which would breed resentment that would poison any relationship they tried to build, or he'd find a way to handle the problem that would protect his business interests and social standing. Neither option had seemed like it would result in a healthy environment for raising a child. But Emma's pregnancy had held one more surprise. At the 20-week ultrasound, she'd learned she was carrying twins. 2 babies who would grow up without their father because their mother was too proud to trap a man who'd made his priorities crystal clear. Emma had used her severance package and savings to move to Philadelphia, where the cost of living was lower and where she could disappear into anonymity while she figured out how to raise 2 children alone. She'd started a small business consulting firm, working from home while pregnant and gradually building a client base that allowed her to support her growing family. Lily and Sophie Carter had been born on a snowy February morning, 2 perfect little girls who'd never known they had a father worth billions of dollars. Emma had chosen not to list a father on their birth certificates, had raised them to believe that sometimes families were just mommies and babies, and that was perfectly normal and complete. For 5 years, Emma's plan had worked perfectly. The twins were happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. Emma's consulting firm had grown successful enough to provide a comfortable middle-class life. They lived in a modest house in a good neighborhood. The girls attended excellent schools, and Emma had convinced herself that they were better off without Alexander Stone's complicated world of wealth and social expectations. Until Lily had gotten sick. Until the only thing that could save her daughter's life was bone marrow from the man who destroyed Emma's faith and love and whom she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. The conversation they're about to have will determine if an innocent child lives or dies. Are you holding your breath? Comment below if you think he'll help her despite their painful history. Now, As Emma sat in the hospital corridor waiting for Alexander to arrive for their first face-to-face meeting in 5 years, she felt like she was drowning in the weight of decisions she'd made and secrets she'd kept. Dr. Martinez had explained that the donor, Alexander, would arrive at 10 a.m. for what he believed was a standard pre-procedure consultation with the patient's family. He had no idea that the family he was meeting included his own children. "Mrs. Carter," Dr. Martinez had said gently, "I want to prepare you for how difficult this conversation might be. Mr. Stone believes he's here to discuss donating bone marrow to a child whose family specifically requested to meet him. He doesn't know why you requested the meeting, and he certainly doesn't know about his biological connection to the twins." "I understand," Emma had replied, though she wasn't sure she understood anything anymore. "How do you want to handle this? Do you want to tell him about his paternity before or after we discuss the medical procedures?" Emma had considered the question for days, and she still didn't have a good answer. "I think we should focus on Lily first, on what she needs and what the procedure involves. The rest, we'll figure out the rest as we go." "And the twins? Do they know they're meeting their father today?" "They know a man is coming who might be able to help Lily get better," Emma had said carefully. "They don't know anything beyond that." Now, at 9:47 a.m., Emma sat in the family consultation room with both twins, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she watched the door for Alexander's arrival. Lily was in a wheelchair. The latest round of chemo had left her weak, but she was alert and curious about the meeting. Sophie sat protectively beside her sister, holding her hand the way she had throughout this entire ordeal. "Mommy, you look scared," Sophie observed with the brutal honesty of 5-year-olds. "Is the man who's coming scary?" "No, sweetheart," Emma replied, smoothing Sophie's dark hair that was exactly the same shade as Alexander's. "He's not scary. Mommy's just nervous about talking to someone she used to know." "Did you used to be friends?" Lily asked. Emma's throat tightened with the complexity of that question. "Something like that." "Maybe you can be friends again," Sophie suggested with the optimism of childhood. "Sometimes when people help each other, they become friends." Before Emma could respond, there was a soft knock on the consultation room door. Dr. Martinez's voice called out, "Mrs. Carter? Mr. Stone is here." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood up, smoothing her sweater and trying to prepare herself for seeing Alexander again after 5 years. Nothing could have prepared her for the reality. The door opened, and Alexander Stone walked into the room looking exactly like Emma's memories and completely different at the same time. He was still tall and lean, still carried himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. His dark hair was shorter now, with subtle threads of silver at the temples that only made him more distinguished. He wore an expensive but understated charcoal suit that emphasized his athletic build without being flashy. But his face was different. Older, obviously, but also marked by something that looked like weariness or regret. The sharp ambition that had once radiated from him seemed tempered by something softer, more thoughtful. Alexander's gaze found Emma first, and she watched as recognition dawned in his green eyes, the same green eyes that stared back at her every day from Sophie's face. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying a dozen complicated emotions. "I had no idea. When they said the family wanted to meet with me, I never imagined." "Hello, Alexander," Emma managed, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Thank you for coming, for agreeing to help." Alexander's gaze moved past Emma to the 2 little girls sitting quietly in the hospital chairs, and Emma watched as his entire world shifted on its axis. The resemblance was unmistakable. Both twins had Emma's delicate features and her smile, but they had Alexander's coloring, his hair, and most strikingly, his distinctive green eyes. Sophie particularly looked like she could have been Alexander's childhood photographs brought to life. Alexander stared at the twins for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning realization. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Emma, how old are they?" 5, Emma replied, watching as Alexander did the mathematical calculation that would confirm what his eyes were already telling him. 5 years old, he repeated slowly, his gaze moving between the twins and Emma. Which means they were born about 8.5 months after our last conversation," Emma said quietly. Sophie, who had been watching this exchange with growing curiosity, suddenly stood up from her chair and walked directly to Alexander. She stopped in front of him and tilted her head back to study his face with the frank assessment that only children could manage. "You have my eyes," she said matter-of-factly. "And my hair. Are you our daddy?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Alexander looked down at Sophie, then at Lily still seated in her wheelchair, then back at Emma with an expression of such profound shock that Emma almost felt sorry for him. "Yes," Alexander said finally, his voice cracking slightly on the single word. "I think I am." Sophie's innocent question, "Are you our daddy?" had shattered the careful composure Alexander Stone had maintained throughout a decade of high-stakes business negotiations. He stared down at the little girl whose green eyes were mirror images of his own, his throat working soundlessly as he struggled to process the magnitude of what he was discovering. "Yes," he said again, the word coming out stronger this time as the reality settled into his bones. "I think I am your daddy." Sophie's face lit up with the uncomplicated joy that only 5-year-olds could manage. "I knew it. Lily, look. We found our daddy, and he's going to make you better." From her wheelchair, Lily smiled weakly but genuinely. "Hi, Daddy," she said simply, as if greeting a father she'd been waiting her whole life to meet was the most natural thing in the world. Alexander felt his knees go weak. These two perfect little girls, his daughters, were looking at him with trust and acceptance he hadn't done anything to earn. He'd missed 5 years of their lives, 5 years of birthdays and bedtime stories and scraped knees and Christmas mornings, and they were welcoming him like he'd just been away on a long trip. Alexander started, then stopped, overwhelmed by emotions he'd never experienced before. He looked at Emma, who was watching this interaction with tears streaming down her face. "Emma, why didn't you tell me?" Before Emma could answer, Dr. Martinez cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should sit down and discuss the medical situation first. We can address the personal aspects of this reunion after we've covered what Lily needs for her treatment." Alexander dragged his attention away from his daughters with visible effort. "Yes, of course. The bone marrow donation. That's why I'm here." "Actually, Mr. Stone," Dr. Martinez said carefully, "now that we understand the family dynamics involved, there are some additional considerations we need to discuss." "What kind of considerations?" "You're not just a compatible donor anymore. You're Lily's biological father, which changes both the medical and legal aspects of this situation significantly." Alexander sat down heavily in one of the consultation room chairs, his business-trained mind trying to process the implications while his heart reeled from meeting his children. "How does it change things?" "Medically, it confirms why you're such a perfect match. Parent-child bone marrow compatibility is extremely high, which means the chances of Lily's body accepting your donation are excellent. Legally, it means you now have parental rights and responsibilities that didn't exist when you were simply an anonymous donor." Emma's face went pale. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that Mr. Stone can now make medical decisions for Lily alongside you, Mrs. Carter. It also means that after the immediate crisis is resolved, you'll need to address custody arrangements, financial support, and other parental obligations." Alexander held up a hand. "Let's focus on saving Lily's life first. Everything else can be sorted out later." "Absolutely," Dr. Martinez agreed. "The bone marrow extraction procedure is relatively straightforward. We'll harvest stem cells from your hip bone under general anesthesia. The process takes about 2 hours, and you'll need to stay in the hospital overnight for observation. Lily's transplant will happen simultaneously. As we're extracting your bone marrow, we'll be preparing her to receive it." "What are the risks?" Alexander asked. "For you, minimal. Some pain and stiffness at the extraction site, fatigue for a few days, but most donors recover completely within 2 weeks. For Lily, the risks are more significant because of her compromised immune system, but given the perfect genetic match, we're very optimistic about her chances." Sophie had been listening to this conversation with the serious attention children gave to important adult discussions they didn't entirely understand. "Does it hurt?" she asked Alexander. "When they take the bone marrow to give to Lily?" Alexander looked down at his newly discovered daughter, struck by her concern for his well-being. "A little bit," he admitted honestly, "but not as much as it would hurt to lose your sister." Sophie nodded solemnly. "We can take care of you while you get better. Mommy's really good at taking care of sick people." Alexander's gaze moved to Emma, taking in the exhaustion etched in her features, the careful strength she'd maintained throughout this crisis, the way she protected and raised their daughters without any help from him. "Your mommy is very good at taking care of people," he agreed quietly. Dr. Martinez continued explaining the medical timeline. The procedure would happen the next morning, followed by a critical 72-hour period where they'd monitor Lily's body's acceptance of the new bone marrow. If all went well, Lily could be in remission within a month and fully recovered within 6 months. "I'll need to make some arrangements," Alexander said when the medical briefing concluded. "Cancel meetings, reschedule commitments. How long should I plan to stay in Philadelphia?" "The extraction procedure requires 1 night in the hospital, but I'd recommend staying in the area for at least a week to monitor Lily's initial response," Dr. Martinez replied. "A week," Alexander repeated, glancing at Emma. "I'll need somewhere to stay. There are several hotels near the hospital," Emma said quietly. "Actually," Dr. Martinez interjected, "given the family situation, it might be beneficial for Mr. Stone to be easily accessible to both his daughters during this period. Sophie will need support too, and Lily may find comfort in having both parents nearby." The implication hung in the air that Alexander should stay close to Emma and the twins, that they should navigate this crisis as a family unit despite 5 years of separation and all the unresolved pain between them. "We have a guest room," Emma said finally, her voice careful and neutral. "If you think it would help the girls." Alexander looked at her, recognizing the sacrifice this offer represented. Having him in her home would be emotionally difficult for Emma, but she was putting Lily's needs first, just as she'd apparently been doing for 5 years. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'd like that very much." The moment Alexander sees his own eyes looking back at him from those little faces changes everything. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the emotional tsunami that's coming will leave you speechless. After Dr. Martinez left to schedule the procedure, Alexander found himself alone with Emma and his daughters for the first time. The silence stretched uncomfortably as 5 years of unspoken words and unresolved pain filled the room. "I should call my office," Alexander said finally. "Let them know I'll be out for the rest of the week." "Daddy," Lily said softly, and Alexander's heart nearly stopped at hearing the word directed at him. "Are you sad that you didn't know about us?" Alexander knelt beside Lily's wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. "I'm sad that I missed so much time with you and Sophie," he said honestly. "But I'm not sad about finding out now. Meeting you is the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." "Mommy used to cry sometimes," Sophie offered with the brutal honesty of childhood. "When we asked about our daddy, she said you lived very far away and couldn't visit us." Alexander's gaze moved to Emma, who was looking anywhere but at him. "Your mommy was protecting you," he said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be. Will you stay with us after Lily gets better?" Sophie asked. "Will you be our daddy every day instead of just when we're in the hospital?" The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. These children were asking for a commitment he wasn't sure he knew how to make, a level of emotional availability he'd never been required to provide. But looking at their hopeful faces, he found himself making a promise that surprised him with its certainty. "I want to be your daddy every day," he said quietly. "But that's something your mommy and I need to figure out together." Emma's composure finally cracked. "Girls, why don't you go see if the nurses have any new coloring books in the activity room? Daddy and I need to talk about some grown-up things." Sophie took charge of Lily's wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of a sister who'd been helping throughout this medical crisis. "Come on, Lily. Let's go draw pictures for Daddy so he has something to look at when he's getting his bone marrow taken out." After the twins left, Emma and Alexander stared at each other across the consultation room. 5 years of hurt and anger and unfinished business stretching between them like a chasm. "5 years, Emma," Alexander said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "5 years you kept this from me." "You made your position very clear," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength from familiar anger. "People like you don't end up with people like me, remember? I wasn't worth choosing over a business deal." "That's not," Alexander started, then stopped, recognizing the truth in her words. "I was wrong. About everything. About what mattered. About what I wanted about you." You were engaged to someone else 3 weeks after you threw me away like garbage, Emma said, years of suppressed pain finally surfacing. You married Victoria Ashworth. You built the life you said you wanted. Don't pretend you would have wanted to know about the pregnancy. I didn't marry Victoria, Alexander said quietly. Emma blinked in surprise. What? I called off the engagement 6 months after I announced it. The merger went through anyway. Turned out the Ashworths cared more about the technology patents than about my marital status. I've been divorced for 3 years. Divorced? But you said, I said a lot of things I didn't mean because I was scared and stupid and convinced that business success was the only thing that mattered. Alexander ran his hands through his hair in the gesture Emma remembered from their time together. I married Victoria because I thought I was supposed to. Because it made sense on paper. But I never loved her, Emma. I was still in love with you. Emma stared at him, processing this information that contradicted everything she'd believed for 5 years. You were in love with me? I never stopped being in love with you. The night I ended our relationship was the worst mistake of my life, but by the time I realized it, you'd disappeared. I tried to find you. I hired investigators. I called everyone who'd ever worked with you. I even went to your old apartment building. You'd vanished completely. I didn't want to be found, Emma said quietly. I was pregnant and heartbroken, and I couldn't bear the thought of you trying to fix the problem with money or legal agreements. Is that what you think I would have done? I think you would have done whatever protected your business interests and your reputation. Just like you did when you chose the merger over our relationship. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. You're right. 5 years ago, that's exactly what I would have done. I would have seen the pregnancy as a complication to be managed rather than a miracle to be celebrated. And now I've spent 5 years learning that all the money and success in the world means nothing if you don't have anyone to share it with. Now I've just met my daughters and realized I've been living half a life without even knowing it. Emma studied his face, looking for the calculation and ambition that had once driven every decision he made. What changed? Losing you changed me. Realizing that I'd thrown away the best thing in my life for a business deal that ended up meaning nothing. Spending 3 years married to someone I didn't love while thinking about you every single day. Alexander's voice grew raw with emotion. Discovering that I have 2 incredible daughters who've been growing up without their father because I was too arrogant and short-sighted to recognize what actually mattered. Alexander, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can't undo 5 years of absence or take back the things I said that night. But Emma, if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making up for those mistakes. Before Emma could respond, Sophie and Lily returned with their artwork, colorful drawings of stick figures labeled Mommy, Lily, Sophie, and Daddy standing together in front of a house with an oversized sun shining down on them. Look, Daddy, Sophie said proudly. I drew our family. Alexander took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. It's beautiful, Sophie. Is this your house? It's the house we're going to live in when Lily gets better, Lily explained matter-of-factly. All of us together like real families. Alexander looked at Emma over the twins' heads, seeing his own emotions reflected in her eyes. Hope and fear and the desperate desire to give these children the stable family they deserved, tempered by the realistic knowledge that love alone might not be enough to overcome 5 years of hurt and separation. We'll see, sweetheart, Emma said gently. Right now we need to focus on getting you healthy. The rest of the day passed in a blur of pre-surgical consultations, paperwork, and the strange intimacy of navigating a medical crisis as a newly reunited family. Alexander stayed close to the twins, marveling at their personalities and trying to absorb 5 years' worth of getting to know his children in the space of a few hours. Lily was quiet and thoughtful, an observer who seemed to understand more than her 5 years should have allowed. She asked Alexander about his work, about the buildings his company had helped design, about whether he liked books as much as she did. Sophie was more energetic despite the stress of her sister's illness, full of questions about where Alexander lived, whether he had any pets, whether he knew how to braid hair, and if he could teach her to tie her shoes the daddy way instead of the mommy way. Emma watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and terror. Alexander was good with the children, patient, genuinely engaged, treating them like complete people rather than miniature adults. But she'd seen his charm before, had fallen for his ability to make her feel like the most important person in his world right up until the moment she wasn't. That evening, they went to Emma's house, a modest two-story colonial in a quiet Philadelphia suburb that was everything Alexander's Manhattan penthouse wasn't. It was warm and lived in, with children's artwork covering the refrigerator, family photos on every surface, and the kind of comfortable chaos that spoke of real family life. "This is our home," Sophie announced, giving Alexander the grand tour with 5-year-old enthusiasm. "This is my room, and this is Lily's room, and this is Mommy's room, and this is the guest room where you'll sleep." Alexander took in every detail, the twins' bedroom walls covered with their artwork, the bookshelf overflowing with children's stories, the photos documenting 5 years of birthdays and holidays, and everyday moments he'd missed. "They're beautiful children," he said to Emma as they stood in the hallway looking at a photo collage of the twins' first 5 years. "They are," Emma agreed. "They're smart and kind and resilient. They've had a good life, Alexander. I want you to know that." "I can see that. You've done an incredible job raising them alone." "I wasn't completely alone. I had help, my mother, good friends, a wonderful daycare. But yes, most of it was just us." Alexander studied a photo of Emma at what looked like the twins' 3rd birthday party, surrounded by other mothers and children, smiling but with tired eyes that spoke of the weight of single parenthood. "Emma, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay. If I hadn't been a bone marrow match, if Lily hadn't gotten sick, would you ever have told me about them?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "I told myself I was protecting them from the complications that come with your world. But maybe I was also protecting myself from having to see you again. And now everything's different. You've met them, they know you're their father, and there's no going back to the way things were. Do you want to go back?" Emma looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd walked into that hospital room. "I want what's best for Lily and Sophie. I want them to have a father who chooses them every day, not just when it's convenient or emotionally satisfying. I want them to grow up feeling secure and loved and never wondering if they're worth staying for." "They are," Alexander said firmly. "They're worth everything." That night, after the twins were asleep, Emma and Alexander sat in her living room drinking coffee and talking about logistics, custody arrangements, financial support, how to integrate Alexander into the children's lives without disrupting their stability. "I don't want your money," Emma said bluntly. "I've been supporting them fine on my own." "This isn't about what you want or need," Alexander replied gently. "It's about my responsibility to my children. I've missed 5 years of supporting them. I want to contribute to their future, college funds, activities, whatever they need. And if this doesn't work out, if we try to co-parent and it becomes too complicated or difficult, it will work out because we'll make it work out. Because they need both of us, and we're both going to put their needs first." Emma studied his face in the lamplight. "You sound different. More certain about personal things than you used to be. Losing you taught me what certainty actually feels like. For 5 years, I've been certain that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. Meeting our daughters just confirmed that." "Our daughters," Emma repeated softly. "Our daughters," Alexander confirmed. "I know I have to earn the right to be their father, Emma. I know that title comes with daily choices and consistency and putting them first even when it's inconvenient. But I want to earn it." The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching the anxiety that had kept both Emma and Alexander awake most of the night. They returned to the hospital early, where Alexander underwent final pre-surgical tests while the twins tried to distract themselves with coloring books and tablet games. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Lily asked as Alexander was being prepped for the bone marrow extraction. "A little bit," Alexander admitted, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "But I'm more excited than scared because this is going to help you get better." "I'm scared too," Lily confessed. "What if it doesn't work?" Alexander took her small hands in his larger ones. "Then we'll try something else. But Lily, I want you to know something very important." "What?" "No matter what happens with the procedure, I'm going to be your daddy forever now. I'm going to be here for every doctor's appointment and every birthday and every time you need someone to read you a story or help you with homework. You're never going to have to wonder if your daddy loves you, because I'm going to make sure you know it every single day." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Promise. I promise." Sophie hugged Alexander fiercely before he was taken into surgery. "Take care of Lily's bone marrow, Daddy. Make sure it's the very best kind." "I will, sweetheart." The bone marrow extraction took 3 hours, longer than expected because Alexander's bone marrow was so healthy that the doctors were able to harvest extra stem cells to ensure the best possible outcome for Lily. Meanwhile, Lily underwent the preparatory chemotherapy that would eliminate her existing immune system and prepare her body to accept her father's bone marrow. Emma spent those 3 hours in the surgical waiting area, alternating between pacing and sitting in uncomfortable plastic chairs, her mind cycling through every possible complication and outcome. When Dr. Martinez finally appeared with news that both procedures had gone perfectly, Emma burst into tears of relief. "Alexander is in recovery and asking for you," Dr. Martinez said. "And Lily is receiving the bone marrow transfusion now. We should know within 24 hours if her body is accepting the new cells." Emma found Alexander in a hospital bed, pale but alert, with bandages covering the extraction sites on his lower back. He was trying to sit up when she entered the room. "How is she?" he asked immediately. "The transfusion is happening now. Dr. Martinez says the next 24 hours are critical." Alexander nodded, then winced as the movement pulled at his surgical sites. "Where are the girls?" "Sophie's with my mother in the family room. I told her you'd want to see her as soon as you were awake." "I do. But Emma, first I need to tell you something." "What?" Lying in that operating room, knowing that part of me was going into Lily to save her life, it made me realize something I should have understood 5 years ago. "What's that?" "Family isn't something you fit into your schedule when it's convenient. It's not a bonus you add to your life after you've achieved everything else you want. Family is the life. Everything else, money, success, recognition, it's all just scaffolding around what actually matters." Emma sat down in the chair beside his bed. "Alexander, I know you don't trust me yet. I know I have to prove that I've changed, that I can be the father Lily and Sophie deserve and the partner you deserve. But Emma, I need you to know that this isn't about guilt or obligation or trying to fix my mistakes. What is it about? It's about the fact that meeting our daughters and seeing what an incredible mother you've become has reminded me who I am when I'm with you. I'm not the calculating businessman who puts deals before people. I'm not the man who's afraid of choosing love over security. With you, I'm the man I always wanted to be but was too scared to become." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing his words against 5 years of hurt and self-protection. "And if the girls and I don't fit into your life as neatly as you hope, if being a family is messier and more complicated than you're imagining, then we'll figure it out together. We'll make mistakes, and we'll learn from them, and we'll keep choosing each other every day until it gets easier." Before Emma could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway with Emma's mother, eager to see her daddy after his surgery. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Sophie asked, climbing carefully onto the hospital bed beside Alexander. "I'm perfect," Alexander replied, wrapping his arm around his daughter. "How's Lily?" "She's sleeping. Grandma says the new bone marrow is like seeds that have to grow in Lily's body to make her strong again." "That's exactly right. And while we're waiting for those seeds to grow, I'm going to tell you and Lily stories about all the things I want to do with you when she's feeling better." "What kind of things?" "Well, I want to teach you both how to ride bikes and take you to see the ocean and help you build the tallest sandcastle anyone has ever built. I want to take you to work with me sometimes so you can see what Daddy does during the day, and I want to learn how to braid hair and paint fingernails and all the important daddy skills I missed out on." Sophie giggled. "You don't know how to braid hair?" "Not yet, but I'm a very fast learner." Over the next 72 hours, as they waited for signs that Lily's body was accepting Alexander's bone marrow, their makeshift family fell into a rhythm of shared hospital vigils and tentative bonding. Alexander proved surprisingly adept at entertaining a recovering 5-year-old. He read stories with dramatic voices, played endless games of I Spy, and listened patiently to Lily's detailed explanations of her favorite books and movies. Sophie divided her time between her father and sister, delighted to finally have both parents available to answer her constant stream of questions and meet her need for attention during this scary time. Emma watched these interactions with growing amazement and cautious hope. Alexander wasn't performing fatherhood. He was living it, adjusting his approach to each child's personality, learning their preferences and fears, becoming genuinely invested in their well-being beyond the medical crisis. On the third day, Dr. Martinez delivered the news they'd all been hoping for. Lily's body was not only accepting Alexander's bone marrow, but the new cells were already beginning to produce healthy blood cells. "She's going to be okay," Dr. Martinez said, his smile matching the relief on every face in the room. "We'll need to monitor her closely for the next few months, but all indicators suggest the transplant was a complete success." Lily, who had been gaining strength daily as the new bone marrow took hold, threw her arms around Alexander. "Thank you for saving me, Daddy. Thank you for letting me be your daddy," Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion. That evening, as they prepared to finally go home as a family, Emma found herself alone with Alexander in Lily's hospital room while the twins said goodbye to their favorite nurses. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we go home and figure out how to be a family," Alexander replied. "I'm going to find a house in Philadelphia, something close to your neighborhood so the girls don't have to change schools. I'm going to reorganize my business so I can work from here most of the time. And I'm going to spend every day earning the right to be part of this family. And us? What happens with us?" Alexander looked at her with an expression that held all the love and regret and hope of their shared history. "That's up to you, Emma. I know I love you. I never stopped loving you. I know I want to build a life with you and our daughters. But I also know that love isn't enough if you can't trust me to choose you and them over everything else." Emma was quiet for a moment, watching Lily and Sophie through the hospital room window as they hugged their nurses goodbye. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Of what? Of believing this is real. Of letting myself hope that you've really changed, that this time you'll stay. Of our daughters getting their hearts broken if this doesn't work out. I'm scared too," Alexander admitted. "I'm scared of messing this up, of not being the father they need, of losing you again. But Emma, I'd rather be scared with you than certain without you." Emma turned to face him fully, seeing vulnerability and determination in his expression. "If we do this, if we try to be a family, there have to be rules. Name them. The girls come first. Always. Every decision we make has to be about what's best for them, not what's easiest or most convenient for us." "Agreed. No more secrets. No more protecting each other from complicated truths. If we're going to be partners, we have to be honest partners." "Absolutely. And Alexander, if you ever decide that this life isn't what you want, if you ever realize that family commitments are too restrictive or demanding, you have to tell me immediately. You can't stay out of obligation or guilt. Our daughters deserve a father who chooses them because he wants them, not because he has to have them." Alexander stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his green eyes. "Emma, 5 years ago, I was an idiot who thought that success meant accumulating things, money, recognition, power. I thought family was something you added to a successful life, not something that made life successful. And now? Now I know that everything I've accomplished means nothing compared to hearing Lily call me daddy or seeing Sophie's face light up when I walk into a room. Now I know that the only success that matters is building something lasting with the people you love." Emma studied his face, looking for any trace of the calculating ambition that had once driven every decision he made. Instead, she saw the same man who had held her through sleepless nights 6 years ago, who had listened to her dreams and fears, who had made her believe in love before he'd broken her heart. But she also saw something new, a depth and certainty that hadn't existed before, the wisdom that came from loss and regret, and the determination to be better. "One day at a time," she said finally. "One day at a time," Alexander agreed. "And if it works? If we can really do this?" Alexander smiled, the first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him since he'd walked into that hospital room 3 days ago. "Then we'll be the luckiest family in the world." 6 months later, Emma Stone, she'd taken Alexander's name when they remarried in a small ceremony with just the twins and Emma's mother as witnesses, stood in the kitchen of their new house, a spacious colonial in the same neighborhood where the twins had started kindergarten, watching her family through the window. Alexander was in the backyard with Lily and Sophie, teaching them to garden in the raised beds they'd built together. Lily, now in complete remission and healthier than she'd ever been, was carefully planting tomato seedlings while explaining to her father the proper spacing requirements she'd learned from a library book. Sophie was more interested in digging holes than planting anything, but Alexander listened to her chatter about earthworms and soil composition with the same serious attention he'd once reserved for board meetings. "Mommy, come help us plant the flowers," Lily called from the garden. "Coming, sweetheart," Emma called back, removing her apron and heading outside to join her family. Alexander looked up as she approached, soil streaking his hands and the kind of genuine contentment on his face that no business deal had ever produced. "How was the conference call with the new client?" "Excellent. They want to hire us for a 6-month project redesigning their employee wellness programs." Emma's consulting firm had grown significantly since she and Alexander had married. Having his business connections hadn't hurt, but her reputation for innovative human resources solutions had been built on her own merit. "That's wonderful. Will it require travel?" "Some, but nothing we can't manage around the girl's schedule." This was how they made decisions now. As partners who understood that family logistics came first and business opportunities were evaluated based on how they fit into their shared life rather than forcing their life to accommodate work demands. "Daddy, look." Sophie held up a handful of earthworms. "I found the helpers for our garden." "Those are excellent helpers," Alexander agreed seriously. "Should we make them a special place to live?" As Emma knelt beside Lily to help with the tomato planting, she reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that terrifying day when Lily had been diagnosed with leukemia. The medical crisis that had forced them back together had ultimately given them the chance to build something stronger and more authentic than what they'd lost 5 years earlier. Alexander had kept every promise he'd made. He'd relocated his business operations to Philadelphia, restructuring his company to allow him to work primarily from home. He'd learned to braid hair after watching several YouTube tutorials, had attended every parent-teacher conference and school play, and had become the kind of father who knew his daughter's favorite bedtime stories by heart. More importantly, he'd proven that his priorities had fundamentally shifted. When business crises arose that demanded his immediate attention, he'd found ways to handle them without abandoning family commitments. When opportunities for expansion or acquisition presented themselves, he'd evaluated them based on whether they would enhance or diminish his ability to be present for his wife and daughters. "Emma," Alexander said quietly as they worked together in the garden while the twins played nearby, "do you ever regret it? Taking the chance on us again?" Emma looked at him, taking in the man who'd learned to put tomato planting ahead of quarterly reports, who'd chosen love over ambition and family over empire. "Never," she said firmly. "Do you? My only regret is that it took a medical crisis for me to find you again. I wish I'd been brave enough to choose you and the girls from the beginning. But if you had been, we might not have appreciated what we have now. Maybe we both needed to grow into the people who could build this kind of family." Alexander nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "Besides, I like our story. It has a happy ending." "Daddy, Mommy," Lily called out. "Come see what Sophie and I planted." They walked over to discover that the twins had created an elaborate garden design involving flowers arranged in the shape of a heart, with family spelled out in marigold seeds. "It's perfect," Emma said, hugging both girls. "When the flowers grow, it will say that we're a family that loves each other," Sophie explained proudly. "We are indeed," Alexander agreed, wrapping his arms around all 3 of his girls. If this story reminded you that sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest blessings, and that true love can survive even the deepest wounds, smash that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs hope. What moment in this story touched you most? Drop it in the comments below, and remember, sometimes the people who save our lives are the ones we thought we'd lost forever. The truest test of love isn't whether it survives good times, but whether it can grow stronger through crisis and forgiveness. Emma and Alexander discovered that when you choose family over pride, healing over hurt, and love over fear, you don't just get a second chance, you get a better chance, built on the foundation of who you've become rather than who you used to be. This has been another story from Luxe Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth, where love always finds a way and families are built through choice, commitment, and the courage to put each other first. Until next time. Remember that it's never too late to become the person your family needs you to be, and sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected circumstances. She gave the billionaire CEO a lift in the rain. What happened 2 days later changed her life forever. You lied to me. I never lied. I told you my name was Phoenix, which is true. Phoenix Harrison Westbrook. I just didn't tell you the rest. The rest? The rest is that you're the son of the man who killed my father. What are you talking about? Harrison Westbrook. Your father. He owned the company that destroyed my family. The Riverside Gardens Project, 2012. Poor quality steel, substandard concrete. My father took the blame when your company's cost-cutting measures caused a partial collapse that injured 17 people. Jesus Christ. Your father was Antonio Sinclair. You knew? This explosive confrontation between Brooklyn Sinclair and Phoenix Westbrook happened just 48 hours after a chance encounter in a Seattle rainstorm. But how did a simple act of kindness between strangers turn into a devastating revelation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, forgiveness, and the sins of our fathers? Welcome to Lux Love Chronicles. I'm your host, Mr. Wentworth, and tonight I'm bringing you a story that will make you question whether some wounds can ever truly heal, whether love can survive when it's built on generational betrayal, and what happens when helping a stranger leads you directly into the arms of your family's greatest enemy. This is the story of how one rainy evening changed 2 lives forever, and why sometimes the people who seem like enemies are actually the key to our salvation. Stay with me, because what unfolds next will challenge everything you believe about second chances and the power of truth to set us free. If you believe in the magic of unexpected encounters and the courage it takes to love someone who represents your greatest pain, show me your support by hitting that like button right now. Let me take you back to where it all began. 2 days before that explosive confrontation that you just heard. The rain that October evening in Seattle fell with vindictive fury. The sky had opened up without warning, turning the downtown streets into rivers and catching everyone unprepared for nature's sudden tantrum. Brooklyn Sinclair pulled her designer coat tighter as she hurried across the slick pavement toward her Tesla Model S. At 29, she had already established herself as one of the most innovative, sustainable architects on the West Coast. Her buildings didn't just house people. They created communities, fostered connections, and proved that environmental responsibility and stunning design could coexist beautifully. The meeting she'd just left had secured the biggest contract of her career, the Harbor Vista Project, a sustainable housing complex that could revolutionize urban development. But as she rushed through the downpour, Brooklyn felt the familiar weight of expectations that had driven her since childhood. Every success was measured against the memory of her father, Antonio Sinclair, whose construction career had ended in scandal and heartbreak 12 years earlier. She was fumbling with her car keys when movement across the street caught her attention. A man stood in the full force of the storm, just standing there like he was welcoming the punishment of the rain. He wasn't even trying to find shelter. He simply stood there, his expensive suit plastered against his tall frame, dark hair dripping water into what appeared to be striking features. There was something haunting about his stillness. Something that spoke to the part of Brooklyn that recognized deep pain when she saw it. In her line of work, she had learned to read people, to understand the stories hidden behind professional facades. This man carried the weight of someone who had lost something irreplaceable. Brooklyn made a decision that would change everything. "Hey," she called out, her voice barely cutting through the storm. "You need a ride." He turned toward her, and the full impact of his attention hit Brooklyn like a lightning strike. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that seemed almost unfair. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that suggested both strength and sensuality, and eyes the color of storm clouds that held depths of pain she instinctively wanted to heal. "I don't want to impose," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold rain. "You'll catch pneumonia standing out here like that. Come on." He moved toward her car with fluid grace, and Brooklyn found herself studying the way he carried himself. Confident, but somehow careful, as if he had learned not to take up too much space in the world. They settled into the warm sanctuary of her car, rain drumming against the roof and creating an intimate cocoon around them. "I'm Brooklyn," she said, starting the engine and immediately feeling the tension that seemed to fill every inch of space between them. "Phoenix," he replied, and something flickered in his expression when he said it. As if the name carried weight he wasn't sure he wanted to bear. "Where can I drop you?" "Anywhere downtown is fine. I can catch a cab from there." Brooklyn pulled into the heavy traffic, hyper-aware of his presence beside her. He smelled like rain and something darker. Cedar maybe, or sandalwood. When she glanced sideways, she caught him studying her profile with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What were you doing out there?" she asked, needing to break the charged silence. Phoenix was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much truth to share with a stranger. Thinking, sometimes you need the storm outside to match the one inside. The honesty in his voice surprised her. Most people, especially men who wore suits that clearly cost more than her monthly rent, didn't admit to inner turmoil to complete strangers. Rough day. Rough decade. His smile was rueful, transforming his face from merely handsome to absolutely breathtaking. "What about you? You look like someone who just conquered the world." "Just secured my dream project, actually. Designing a new sustainable housing complex that could change how we think about urban development." "Congratulations. What kind of buildings do you design?" As Brooklyn described her work, she found herself opening up in ways she rarely did with strangers. Phoenix listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood not just the technical aspects of her work, but the passion behind it. "You're trying to heal the world one building at a time," he observed as they stopped at a red light. "Something like that. Architecture has power. The power to create community, to protect the environment, to give people hope. And you've experienced the opposite? Buildings that destroy rather than create." The question was gentle but probing, and Brooklyn felt something twist in her chest. There was an understanding in his voice that suggested he knew what it felt like to carry the weight of past mistakes. "My father was a construction foreman. He spent his life building things, creating homes for families. Then one project went wrong, and everything fell apart." She hadn't meant to share that personal detail, but something about Phoenix's presence made her want to be honest. "What happened?" Brooklyn took a deep breath, surprised by how much she wanted to tell this stranger about the defining tragedy of her life. Poor materials, corners cut to save money, people who cared more about profit than safety. "When the building partially collapsed, my father took the blame. He lost everything. His reputation, his business, his will to live." "I'm sorry." The simple words carried such genuine compassion that Brooklyn felt tears threaten for the first time in years. It was 12 years ago. He died of a heart attack 2 years later. Stress and shame eating him alive. But it taught me that buildings matter, that the choices we make in creating them can destroy lives or save them. Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, and when Brooklyn glanced at him, she saw something dark and troubled in his expression. "Your father sounds like he was a good man caught in a bad situation." "He was the best man I ever knew." They drove in comfortable silence for several blocks, the rain creating a private world around them. Brooklyn found herself taking the long way downtown, reluctant to end this unexpected connection. "Can I ask you something?" Phoenix said as they neared the city center. "Sure. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and the electric current that had been building since he'd gotten into her car. "I don't usually go out with strangers I pick up in rainstorms." "Then I'll have to hope I'm the exception." His smile was devastating, and Brooklyn felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. She had spent years focused solely on her career, on proving herself worthy of the success her father had been denied. Romance had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. But this man, with his storm cloud eyes and unexpected depth, made her want to take a risk. "Okay, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up." Brooklyn gave him her address, trying to ignore the voice in her head that warned her she was playing with fire. As Phoenix prepared to get out of the car, he turned back to her with an expression that was both vulnerable and intense. "Thank you, Brooklyn, for the ride, for the conversation, for reminding me that there are still genuinely good people in the world." Before she could respond, he leaned across the space between them and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek. The contact was brief, innocent, but it sent electricity racing through her entire body. "Until tomorrow," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. Brooklyn sat in her car for several minutes after he disappeared into the rain, her hand pressed to her cheek, where she could still feel the warmth of his lips. She had the unsettling feeling that her carefully ordered life had just been turned completely upside down by a stranger whose last name she didn't even know. The next evening, Brooklyn stood in front of her full-length mirror, questioning her choice of dress for the third time. She had selected a deep emerald silk dress that brought out her eyes and hugged her curves in all the right places, but now she wondered if it was too much for a first date with someone she barely knew. Her downtown loft reflected her aesthetic perfectly. Clean lines, sustainable materials, floor-to-ceiling windows that maximized natural light while maintaining privacy. It was beautiful, functional, and utterly empty of the warmth she'd never allowed herself to create. When her doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, Brooklyn felt her heart skip in a way that reminded her she was more invested in this evening than she cared to admit. Phoenix stood in her hallway, looking impossibly handsome in a charcoal gray suit that had clearly been tailored specifically for his tall, athletic frame. His dark hair was styled perfectly, and when he smiled at her, Brooklyn felt her knees go slightly weak. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that made her cheeks flush with pleasure. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. I hope you like Italian food. I made reservations at a place I think you'll appreciate." The restaurant Phoenix had chosen was intimate and elegant, with exposed brick walls and candlelit tables that created an atmosphere of romantic warmth. As they were seated at a corner table with a view of the Seattle skyline, Brooklyn found herself studying Phoenix's face in the flickering candlelight. "Tell me about your work," she said as they settled in with glasses of wine. "You never said what you do." "I'm in development. Construction projects, real estate, that sort of thing." There was something careful about the way he said it, as if he was choosing his words deliberately. Brooklyn sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't push. "That must be interesting. Do you focus on residential or commercial properties?" "Both, really. I'm particularly interested in sustainable development, projects that serve communities rather than just generating profit." "That's refreshing. Too many developers these days seem focused solely on the bottom line." Something flickered in Phoenix's eyes at her words, but it was gone so quickly Brooklyn wondered if she'd imagined it. "What about you?" he said, clearly wanting to change the subject. "When did you know you wanted to be an architect?" "I was 8 years old, sitting in my father's construction trailer, watching him review blueprints. He explained how every line on those papers would become something real, something that would shelter families and create memories. I knew then that I wanted to be part of creating beautiful, meaningful spaces." "He sounds like he had a real impact on your life." "He did. Everything I do is an attempt to honor his memory, to build the kind of structures he believed in." As the evening progressed, Brooklyn found herself falling deeper under Phoenix's spell. He was intelligent, articulate, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. When she talked about her passion for sustainable design, his eyes lit up with real enthusiasm. "I have to ask," Phoenix said as they shared dessert, his fingers brushing hers as they both reached for the same spoon. "How is someone as brilliant and beautiful as you still single?" "Career focus, mostly. I've been so determined to establish myself professionally that I haven't had much time for relationships. And now I'm wondering if maybe I've been missing out on something important." The admission surprised Brooklyn even as she said it. She wasn't usually so open about her personal feelings, especially with someone she'd just met. "I'm glad you think so," Phoenix said softly, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since yesterday. Even though I'm just a stranger who picked you up in the rain. Especially because of that. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who would stop in a storm to help a complete stranger? Most people would have driven right past. Most people aren't raised by Antonio Sinclair. Tell me more about him." Brooklyn found herself sharing stories about her father that she rarely told anyone. His dedication to quality work, his insistence on treating every laborer with respect, his belief that construction was about building dreams as much as buildings. "He sounds like an extraordinary man." He was. Which is why what happened to him was so devastating. He didn't deserve to have his reputation destroyed by other people's greed and carelessness. Phoenix's expression grew troubled, and Brooklyn sensed she had touched on something painful for him as well. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring down the mood. Don't apologize. Your father's story matters. It shaped who you became." "What about your family?" Brooklyn asked. "What shaped who you became?" For the first time all evening, Phoenix seemed genuinely uncomfortable. He took a long sip of wine before answering. My father was also in construction, but our relationship was complicated. In what way? He was a powerful man who believed that success justified almost any means of achieving it. We didn't see eye to eye on business ethics. That must have been difficult. It was, especially when I realized that the company bearing our family name had caused real harm to good people. There was something in Phoenix's voice that made Brooklyn's heart ache for him. She could see the weight he carried, the burden of family legacy that didn't align with his personal values. Is that why you were standing in the rain yesterday? Family guilt, among other things. Phoenix reached across the table and took her hand properly this time, his fingers intertwining with hers in a way that felt both intimate and natural. But meeting you has reminded me that the past doesn't have to define the future, that it's possible to build something beautiful from the ruins of what came before. The intensity in his voice made Brooklyn's pulse quicken. She felt drawn to this man in ways that went beyond physical attraction. Would you like to come back to my place for coffee? She heard herself saying, surprising herself with her boldness. I would love that. The drive back to Brooklyn's loft was charged with anticipation. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every accidental brush of Phoenix's hand against hers sent electricity racing through her system. Once inside her apartment, the pretense of coffee was quickly abandoned. As Brooklyn reached for wine glasses, Phoenix stepped close behind her, his hands settling on her waist with gentle certainty. Brooklyn, he said softly, and she turned in his arms to find him looking at her with an expression of such tender desire that it took her breath away. Yes, I want you to know that this isn't casual for me. Whatever this is between us, it feels like something important. Instead of responding with words, Brooklyn rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her unexpected feelings into the contact between them. Phoenix responded immediately, his arms tightening around her as he deepened the kiss with passionate intensity. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Are you sure about this? Phoenix asked, his forehead resting against hers. I've never been more sure of anything. What followed was a night of lovemaking so intense, so emotionally connected, that Brooklyn felt like she was discovering what intimacy really meant for the first time. Phoenix touched her like she was something precious, worshipped her body with a reverence that made her feel beautiful and desired in ways she'd never experienced. I can't believe this is real, Brooklyn whispered against his chest as they lay tangled in her sheets afterward. What do you mean? This feeling? Like I've been waiting my whole life for you to walk into it. Phoenix's arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. I know exactly what you mean. Yesterday, I was a man going through the motions of living. Tonight, I feel like I'm finally alive. Promise me something, Brooklyn said, tilting her head to look into his storm-gray eyes. Anything. Promise me that whatever happens, whatever complications the real world brings, we'll remember this night. We'll remember what it feels like to be this honest with each other. Something flickered in Phoenix's expression, a shadow of pain that was gone so quickly Brooklyn wondered if she'd imagined it. I promise, he said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he knew more about coming complications than he was letting on. Brooklyn fell asleep in Phoenix's arms, feeling safer and more content than she had in years. She had no way of knowing that in less than 24 hours, everything she thought she knew about the man beside her would be shattered by a revelation so devastating it would change the course of both their lives forever. If you're invested in Brooklyn and Phoenix's story, if you want to know how their perfect night turns into the explosive confrontation you heard at the beginning, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Brooklyn's mood as she watched Phoenix get dressed. He had to leave early for a business meeting, but the way he kept glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read made her stomach flutter with unease. Will I see you tonight? She asked as he buttoned his shirt. I'd like that. But Brooklyn, there are some things about my work, about my family, that are complicated. I want to be completely honest with you, but I need to handle some business first. What kind of things? Phoenix sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. Nothing that changes how I feel about you. Nothing that changes what happened between us last night. But there are aspects of my past that I need to explain properly. You're starting to scare me. Don't be scared. Just trust me for one more day. Let me take care of some things, and then we'll talk about everything. I promise. After Phoenix left, Brooklyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go very wrong. She tried to focus on work, reviewing plans for the Harbor Vista project, but her mind kept drifting to the man who had turned her world upside down in less than 48 hours. At noon, her assistant knocked on her office door with obvious agitation. "Brooklyn, we have a problem. The primary investor for Harbor Vista wants to meet with you immediately." "What kind of problem?" "I'm not sure, but he seems upset about something in the environmental impact report. He's threatening to pull funding." Brooklyn's stomach dropped. This project represented everything she had worked toward. Losing the funding now would be devastating. "Where is he?" "Conference room at the main office." "And Brooklyn?" "He specifically asked for you to come alone." 20 minutes later, Brooklyn walked into the glass-walled conference room, her professional armor firmly in place. She had dressed carefully in her sharpest charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in the no-nonsense style that had become her signature. The man standing with his back to her, looking out at the Seattle skyline, seemed familiar. Tall, broad-shouldered, expensive suit, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. "Mr. Westbrook," she said, reading the name from the meeting schedule. "I'm Brooklyn Sinclair, the lead architect on the Harbor Vista project." He turned around slowly, and Brooklyn's world tilted completely off its axis. Phoenix, the mysterious stranger from the rainstorm. The man she'd made love to with an intensity that still made her body flush with heat. But this wasn't the vulnerable man who'd stood in the rain. This was someone else entirely. Someone who wore power like a second skin and looked at her with an expression she couldn't begin to read. And that brings us back to the explosive confrontation you heard at the very beginning of our story. "You lied to me." "I never lied. I told you my name was Phoenix, which is true. Phoenix Harrison Westbrook. I just didn't tell you the rest." "The rest?" "The rest is that you're the son of the man who killed my father." The color drained from Phoenix's face as the full implications of what she was saying hit him. "What are you talking about?" "Harrison Westbrook. Your father. He owned the company that destroyed my family. The Riverside Gardens Project, 2012. Poor quality steel, substandard concrete. My father took the blame when your company's cost-cutting measures caused a partial collapse that injured 17 people. Jesus Christ." Phoenix sank into the nearest chair, his composure completely shattered. "Your father was Antonio Sinclair. You knew?" "I knew about the project, yes. It was one of my father's biggest failures, something that haunted our family until the day he died. But I didn't know about your father specifically, didn't know what happened to him afterward." Brooklyn felt like the floor was falling away beneath her feet. He lost everything. His business, his reputation, his will to live. He died believing he was responsible for people getting hurt, never knowing that your father had compromised the materials to increase profit margins. Phoenix looked absolutely stricken, and for a moment Brooklyn saw the vulnerable man from the rainstorm again. But she couldn't let herself be swayed by his apparent remorse. "What are they like?" Phoenix asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What? The people your father left behind. His family. You said he lost everything. But what about the people who loved him?" The question caught Brooklyn off guard. She had expected denials, excuses, corporate doublespeak. She hadn't expected genuine concern for her father's survivors. He left behind a daughter who spent the next 10 years of her life trying to prove that good buildings, ethical buildings, were possible. A daughter who became an architect specifically to honor his memory. And that daughter? How did she survive watching her father destroyed by other people's greed? Brooklyn stared at Phoenix, confused by the pain in his voice, the way he seemed to be taking personal responsibility for events that had happened when he was barely out of college. She survived by promising herself that she would never let anyone else suffer the way her father did, that she would build things that made the world better, not worse. Phoenix stood up and moved to the window, his shoulders tense with what looked like unbearable weight. "Brooklyn, I need you to understand something. When I chose you for this project, it wasn't because of any connection to your father. I selected your firm because your work is brilliant, because you're exactly what sustainable development needs." How convenient. The daughter of the man your family destroyed, now building monuments to your success. "No." Phoenix turned back to her, his voice fierce with denial. "That's not what this is. I chose you because you understand what ethical building means. Because your buildings have soul. My buildings have soul because I learn what happens when buildings don't. When profit matters more than people. Which is exactly why I need you." Why this project needs you. Brooklyn stared at him, confused by the desperation in his voice. I don't understand. Phoenix moved closer, his storm gray eyes intense with an emotion she couldn't name. Sit down, please. Let me tell you why I really started this company. Why I've spent the last 5 years trying to undo everything my father built. Against every instinct screaming at her to leave, Brooklyn sat down across from Phoenix, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. My father was a ruthless businessman who cared about nothing but profit and market dominance. He cut corners, compromised safety standards, destroyed communities in the name of development. The Riverside Gardens collapse wasn't the only project where his cost-cutting measures hurt people. It was just the one that got enough public attention to matter. So you knew what kind of man he was. I knew he was demanding, focused on results above all else. I didn't know about the safety violations, the compromised materials, the systematic cover-ups that protected the company's reputation at the expense of innocent people like your father. Phoenix began pacing, as if he couldn't bear to sit still while confessing his family's sins. When the Riverside Gardens story broke, when I learned what had really happened, I was horrified. I tried to convince my father to make things right, to compensate the families who'd been hurt, to change our business practices completely. He refused. So you walked away? I tried to. But walking away meant abandoning the company to continue the same destructive practices. So instead, I waited. I learned everything I could about sustainable development, about ethical building practices, about how to create developments that serve communities instead of exploiting them. And when your father died, I inherited a company built on corruption and shortcuts and the suffering of good people like your father. So I've spent the last 5 years systematically dismantling everything he built and replacing it with something better. Brooklyn studied Phoenix's face, looking for signs of deception, but all she saw was a man carrying unbearable weight. The Harbor Vista Project. It's not just another development, is it? It's my attempt to prove that development can be a force for good. Affordable housing, sustainable practices, genuine community engagement. Everything my father's projects never were. Phoenix moved closer, and Brooklyn could feel the intensity radiating from him. And you chose me because your father deserved better. Because the families hurt by my father's greed deserved better. Because you understand, in your bones, what responsible building means. The raw honesty in his voice made Brooklyn's chest ache with conflicting emotions. I didn't plan to meet you the way I did, Phoenix continued. I didn't plan to fall in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a live wire. Phoenix, I know it's impossible now. I know that what my family did to yours can't be undone. But Brooklyn, what I felt with you, what we had together, that was real. How can it be real when it's built on lies? Because feelings don't lie. Because when I held you last night, when we talked about building a better world, that wasn't the CEO of Westbrook Development talking. That was just me, the man who's been trying to atone for his father's sins. Brooklyn felt tears threatening as she remembered the night before, the way Phoenix had kissed her with desperate tenderness, the way they'd made love with an intensity that had shaken her to her core. I can't do this, Phoenix. I can't work for you, can't be with you. There's too much history, too much pain. Then help me carry it. The simple request broke something inside Brooklyn's chest. What? Help me carry the guilt, the responsibility, the need to make things right. Help me build something worthy of your father's memory. Why would you want that burden? Because I've been carrying it alone for 5 years, and it's been eating me alive. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to hope. Phoenix moved closer, close enough that she could see the pain and longing in his eyes. I can't change what my father did to yours. I can't bring back the years of suffering your family endured. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to build the kind of company, the kind of developments, that would have made your father proud. And you want me to help you do that? I want you to lead the charge. I want your vision, your integrity, your understanding of what building should be. I want you to design not just structures, but hope itself. Brooklyn looked at this man who was offering to share the burden of his family's sins, and felt something shift deep in her chest. The anger was still there, but it was joined by something else. Recognition of a moral courage that reminded her of her father's integrity. I need time to think. I understand. But Brooklyn, before you decide, I need you to know something. What? I love you. Not the architect, not the symbol of redemption, not the way to assuage my guilt. I love you. The woman who stops in rainstorms to help strangers, who talks about buildings like they're living things, who makes love like she's giving away pieces of her soul. The confession hit her like lightning, and she could see the truth of it in his eyes, the vulnerability that came with laying his heart bare. I need to go. Brooklyn, wait. Please don't disappear on me. Don't let my father's mistakes destroy what we could have together. As Brooklyn stood to leave, she turned back to look at Phoenix one last time. He stood there looking lost and desperate, carrying the weight of his family's legacy like a burden he could never set down. 2 days, she said quietly. What? Give me 2 days to think about everything you've told me. 2 days to decide if love can overcome a legacy of betrayal. And if you decide it can't, then you'll never see me again. Tell me in the comments what you think Brooklyn should do. Can love overcome a legacy of betrayal? Should she give Phoenix a chance to prove he's different from his father? Or is some history too painful to forgive? In the following part, we'll discover whether Brooklyn chooses forgiveness or walks away forever, what explosive secrets Phoenix's investigation uncovers about the past, and how their impossible love story unfolds when truth collides with passion. We'll also learn about the surprise that will change everything for both of them, and whether love really can heal generational wounds. If this story has captured your heart, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles. Share this with someone who believes in the power of love to transform even the most impossible situations. What you're about to hear is the conclusion of Brooklyn Sinclair and Phoenix Westbrook's impossible love story. A story that began with a simple act of kindness in a Seattle rainstorm and exploded into a confrontation that challenged everything they thought they knew about love, forgiveness, and the sins of our fathers. When we left Brooklyn, she had just discovered that the man she was falling in love with was the son of the construction mogul who destroyed her father's life and reputation. She gave Phoenix 2 days to let her think about whether love could overcome a legacy of betrayal. But what Brooklyn doesn't know is that Phoenix is about to uncover evidence that will change everything she believes about the past. Evidence that will force her to choose between holding on to her anger or embracing a truth so devastating it will shatter her understanding of what really happened 12 years ago. This is the story of how love becomes the bridge between past and future, how truth has the power to heal the deepest wounds, and why sometimes the people who seem like our enemies are actually the key to our salvation. If you're ready to discover whether Brooklyn and Phoenix can build something beautiful from the ruins of their family's tragic history, make sure that like button is hit, and let's dive into the conclusion that will leave you believing in the power of second chances. The 2 days Phoenix had given Brooklyn felt like the longest 48 hours of his life. He spent every waking moment thinking about the devastation in her eyes when she learned who he really was, the way her voice had cracked when she talked about her father's death. But Phoenix wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat easily. If Brooklyn needed proof that he was different from his father, then he would find that proof. If she needed to understand the full truth about what had happened 12 years ago, then he would uncover every detail, no matter how painful. That's how Phoenix found himself sitting in the office of Marcus Chun, the private investigator he'd hired to dig deeper into the Riverside Gardens project than anyone had ever gone before. What did you find? Phoenix asked, studying the thick folder Marcus had placed on his desk. More than you're going to want to hear, Marcus replied grimly. Your father didn't just cut corners on this project, Phoenix. He systematically covered up safety violations, buried inspection reports, and when the collapse happened, he orchestrated one of the most thorough character assassinations I've ever seen. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents. These are the original safety reports filed by Antonio Sinclair over a 6-month period leading up to the collapse. He documented everything. Substandard steel, concrete that didn't meet specifications, rushing construction timelines against his professional recommendations. Phoenix studied the reports, his father's handwriting in the margins dismissing each concern as overcautious and unnecessary delays. He tried to stop it, Phoenix said quietly. He did more than try. Look at this. Marcus pulled out a series of emails that made Phoenix's blood run cold. Antonio Sinclair had escalated his concerns all the way up the corporate chain, had threatened to quit rather than sign off on unsafe construction practices. What happened when he threatened to quit? Your father made him an offer he couldn't refuse. double salary, benefits for his family, and a promise that his concerns would be addressed after the project was completed. But they never were. No. And when the building partially collapsed, your father had already prepared his scapegoat. Antonio Sinclair was blamed for every shortcut your father had ordered. Phoenix felt sick as he read through document after document, showing his father's calculated destruction of an innocent man. There's more, Marcus said, pulling out financial records. Your father never paid Antonio the final 6 months of his inflated salary, left him and his family financially devastated on top of the professional ruin. Jesus, how did Brooklyn's family survive? Barely. Her mother worked 3 jobs while Brooklyn was in high school. Brooklyn herself worked part-time all through college to help support them. And when her father died, they couldn't even afford a proper funeral. Phoenix stared at the evidence of his family's cruelty, feeling the weight of generational sin pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. But that's not the worst part, Marcus continued. How could there be worse? Marcus pulled out a final set of documents, these bearing the letterhead of Westbrook Development's legal team. Your father didn't just destroy Antonio Sinclair's reputation. He threatened him, told him that if he ever spoke publicly about what really happened, your father would make sure he was charged criminally as the responsible party. He blackmailed him into silence. More than that, he made Antonio believe that speaking the truth would result in prison time. That man died thinking he was protecting his family by staying quiet about his own innocence. Phoenix felt tears burning behind his eyes as the full scope of his father's evil became clear. Brooklyn's father hadn't just been destroyed. He'd been psychologically tortured into accepting responsibility for crimes he'd tried to prevent. There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly. I found Antonio Sinclair's personal journal from that time period. His daughter doesn't know it exists. His wife gave it to me, thinking it might help clear his name. Marcus handed Phoenix a worn leather journal. Inside, Antonio Sinclair had documented his growing desperation as he tried to prevent a disaster he could see coming. The final entry, dated just 3 days before his death, broke Phoenix's heart completely. I pray that someday Brooklyn will understand that I tried to do the right thing. I pray that she'll build the kind of buildings I always dreamed of, structures that put people before profit. I failed to protect those families, but maybe she can succeed where I couldn't. Maybe my little girl can heal the world one building at a time. Phoenix closed the journal, his hands shaking with emotion. Brooklyn's father had died believing he was a failure, never knowing that he was actually a hero who'd tried to stand against corruption and been destroyed for his integrity. I need copies of everything, Phoenix said. What are you going to do? I'm going to give Brooklyn the truth about her father. And then I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what kind of man Antonio Sinclair really was. That evening, Phoenix stood outside Brooklyn's loft building, a portfolio case filled with evidence heavy in his hands. He'd called ahead, asked if he could see her, told her he had something important to show her about her father. When Brooklyn opened her door, Phoenix was struck again by her beauty, but also by the exhaustion in her eyes. She'd clearly been struggling with the same sleepless nights he'd been experiencing. You said you had something about my father, she said without preamble. I do. But Brooklyn, before I show you this, I need you to know that learning the truth is going to change everything you believe about what happened 12 years ago. What kind of truth? The kind that's going to prove your father was a hero, not a failure. The kind that's going to show you exactly what my father did to destroy an innocent man. Brooklyn stepped aside and let him enter her loft. They sat at her dining table, the portfolio case between them like a bridge across 12 years of pain and misunderstanding. I hired a private investigator, Phoenix said. I asked him to find out everything about the Riverside Gardens project, no matter how ugly the truth turned out to be. He opened the case and pulled out the first set of documents. These are your father's original safety reports. Every concern he raised, every warning he tried to give, every attempt he made to prevent what happened. Brooklyn's hands shook as she read her father's meticulous documentation, his growing desperation as his concerns were dismissed or ignored. He tried to stop it, she whispered. He did more than try. He escalated his concerns all the way to the top of the company. He threatened to quit rather than be associated with unsafe practices. Phoenix pulled out the email chains, the internal memos, the evidence of Antonio Sinclair's integrity in the face of corporate pressure. Why didn't this come out during the investigation? Because my father buried it. Made sure the focus stayed on execution rather than decision-making. Your father was set up to take the fall for failures that came from the very top of the company. Phoenix showed her the financial records, the evidence of unpaid wages and legal threats designed to keep Antonio silent. My father didn't just destroy your father's reputation, Phoenix said quietly. He threatened him with criminal charges if he ever spoke the truth about what happened. Brooklyn stared at the documents, her face cycling through emotions too complex to name. All these years, I thought maybe he'd missed something. Maybe he really was partially responsible. He died believing he'd failed. He died believing he was protecting you and your mother by staying quiet about his own innocence. Phoenix pulled out the final piece of evidence, Antonio's personal journal. I found this. Your father's journal from that time period. Brooklyn, I need you to read the last entry. With trembling hands, Brooklyn read her father's final words about his hopes for her future, his belief that she would succeed where he'd been forced to fail. When she finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. He knew, she said through her sobs. Somehow he knew that I would become an architect, that I would try to build the kind of buildings he believed in. He was proud of you before you even knew what you wanted to become. He saw your future and had faith that you would make it beautiful. Brooklyn looked up at Phoenix through her tears, and for the first time since learning his identity, she saw not the son of her family's destroyer, but a man who'd spent months uncovering the truth to give her father the vindication he deserved. Why? She asked simply. Because your father deserved to have his name cleared. Because you deserve to know that everything you've accomplished was built on the foundation of his integrity, not his failure. What does this mean for your father's company? For your reputation? Phoenix reached across the table and took her hands in his. It means I'm going to do what I should have done 5 years ago. I'm going to make this public. Every document, every cover-up, every injustice. The world is going to know what Harrison Westbrook did to Antonio Sinclair. That could destroy your business. Then it deserves to be destroyed. Brooklyn, I'd rather lose everything than continue building on a foundation of lies and corruption. Brooklyn stared into Phoenix's storm-gray eyes and saw the same moral courage that had driven her father to fight against unsafe practices even when it cost him everything. What do you want from me? She asked softly. I want you to help me make it right. I want your expertise in designing the kind of development your father would have been proud to build. I want to create something beautiful together, something that honors his memory. And what about us? What about what happened between us before I knew who you were? Phoenix lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I love you, Brooklyn. I loved you when you were a stranger who stopped to help someone in the rain. I loved you when we talked about healing the world through architecture. I love you now, knowing that you're the daughter of the man my family wronged. And I'll love you tomorrow when we decide how to move forward together. Phoenix, I know it's complicated. I know that loving me means forgiving things that feel unforgivable. But Brooklyn, what we have together is real. It's worth fighting for. Brooklyn looked at this man who was willing to destroy his own company to clear her father's name, and felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. The anger was still there, but it was being transformed into something else. A determination to build something beautiful from the ruins of the past. If we do this, she said carefully, if we work together to make this public and clear my father's name, what happens to us personally? That's up to you. I'll respect whatever boundaries you need to set. If you want to keep things purely professional, I'll understand. But Brooklyn, I hope you'll consider giving us a real chance. Why? Because love like this doesn't come along often. Because we understand each other in ways that go beyond our family histories. Because together, we could build something that heals not just our own wounds, but contributes to healing the world. Brooklyn was quiet for a long moment, studying Phoenix's face and trying to reconcile the man in front of her with everything she'd believed about his family. I need one promise from you, she said finally. Anything. Promise me that if we do this, if we clear my father's name and build something together, you'll never keep secrets from me again. Promise me complete honesty, even when the truth is painful. I promise. No more secrets, no matter how complicated the truth becomes. Brooklyn took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into an unknown future. Then let's do it. Let's clear my father's name and build something beautiful together. Phoenix's smile was radiant as he leaned across the table and kissed her softly, sealing their commitment to truth and to each other. What followed was the most intense 3 months of Brooklyn's life. Working with Phoenix to prepare the evidence for public release, collaborating with journalists and attorneys to ensure Antonio Sinclair's story was told properly, and designing the Harbor Vista project to reflect the values her father had died defending. The media attention was overwhelming when the story broke. Construction moguls' cover-up exposed, headlines dominated the business news for weeks. Harrison Westbrook's reputation was posthumously destroyed as the details of his corruption and cruelty became public knowledge. But Phoenix weathered the storm with quiet dignity, using every interview as an opportunity to praise Antonio Sinclair's integrity and announce the scholarship fund he was establishing in Antonio's name. "My father's actions were inexcusable," Phoenix said during a particularly intense television interview. "But rather than make excuses, I want to focus on honoring the man he wronged." Antonio Sinclair was a hero who tried to prevent a disaster and was destroyed for his courage. The scholarship bearing his name will ensure that future construction professionals are trained in both technical excellence and ethical responsibility. Through it all, Brooklyn found herself falling deeper in love with Phoenix, not just for his willingness to expose his family's crimes, but for the way he handled the crisis with grace and integrity. He could have blamed his father and distanced himself from the company's past. Instead, he took full responsibility for making amends. Their working relationship evolved naturally into something deeper. Late nights reviewing building plans turned into intimate dinners. Professional discussions about sustainable materials became personal conversations about their hopes for the future. "I want to show you something," Phoenix said one evening as they walked through the early construction of Harbor Vista. He led her to what would become the community center, where a bronze plaque had already been installed. "The Antonio Sinclair Community Center," Brooklyn read aloud, her voice thick with emotion. "Dedicated to the principle that good buildings serve people, not profit. Every family who lives here will know your father's name and what he stood for." Brooklyn felt tears streaming down her face as she read the inscription below her father's name. Antonio Sinclair believed that architecture had the power to create hope. This building stands as proof that his vision lives on through his daughter and all those who choose integrity over convenience. "Phoenix, I can't. This is what your father deserved 12 years ago." Recognition for his courage and integrity. Brooklyn turned to face Phoenix, and the love she saw in his eyes took her breath away. "I love you," she said, the words coming from the deepest part of her heart. "I love your courage, your integrity, your determination to be better than the legacy you inherited. I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." They kissed in the shadow of the building that would stand as her father's memorial, and Brooklyn felt like she was finally free from the weight she'd been carrying for 12 years. But their happiness was about to become even more complicated in the most beautiful way possible. 6 weeks later, Brooklyn stood in her bathroom staring at a positive pregnancy test, her hands shaking with a mixture of joy and terror. She and Phoenix had been so careful about protection, but apparently the universe had other plans. The timing couldn't have been more challenging. The Harbor Vista project was reaching its most critical phase. The media attention around her father's vindication was still intense, and her relationship with Phoenix, while deeply loving, was still relatively new. But as Brooklyn studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror, she felt a sense of rightness about this pregnancy that surprised her. She was 30 years old, financially stable, in love with a man who'd proven his integrity beyond any doubt. If there was ever a time to start a family, this was it. The question was how Phoenix would react. They'd talked about wanting children someday, but would he be ready for someday to arrive so soon? That evening, Brooklyn arranged a romantic dinner at her loft, candles and flowers creating an atmosphere that felt appropriate for life-changing news. "This is beautiful," Phoenix said as he arrived with a bottle of wine. "What's the occasion?" "Just wanted to do something special for the man I love." They talked about the project over dinner, about the media interviews Phoenix had scheduled for the following week, about their plans for the weekend. Brooklyn found herself studying Phoenix's face as he talked, trying to imagine how he'd look when she told him he was going to be a father. "Brooklyn, you seem distracted tonight. Is everything okay?" "Actually, there's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to change our timeline considerably." Phoenix set down his wine glass, his full attention focused on her. "What is it?" I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, and Brooklyn watched Phoenix's face cycle through surprise, confusion, and then pure joy. "Pregnant? As in, we're having a baby." "We're having a baby." Phoenix was out of his chair and pulling Brooklyn into his arms before she could blink, spinning her around the kitchen while laughing with delight. "I can't believe it. We're going to be parents. Are you happy about it?" "I know the timing is complicated with everything else going on." "Happy? Brooklyn, I'm ecstatic. I've wanted to start a family with you since about our third date." "Really? Really? The only thing that could make this better would be if we were married when the baby arrives." Brooklyn felt her heart skip as she registered what Phoenix was saying. "Phoenix, are you?" He was already reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Brooklyn's eyes go wide. "I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment," he said, dropping to one knee in her kitchen. "I was going to wait until Harbor Vista was completed, but Brooklyn, I don't want to wait another day to ask you to be my wife." He opened the box to reveal the most beautiful ring Brooklyn had ever seen. Not ostentatious or overly large, but elegant and perfectly suited to her taste. "Brooklyn Sinclair, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me that honors both our father's memories? Will you help me raise our child to understand that integrity matters more than success, that love is worth any sacrifice?" Brooklyn felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this man who turned her world upside down and then helped her rebuild it into something more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her finger her entire life. As Phoenix stood and kissed her with passionate intensity, Brooklyn felt like every painful moment of the past 12 years had been leading to this perfect instant. "I love you, future Mrs. Westbrook. I love you too, future father of my children." "Children? Plural?" Brooklyn laughed through her tears. "Well, we'll start with one and see how we do." What they didn't know yet was that Brooklyn's ultrasound appointment the following week would reveal that they were actually expecting twins. A boy and a girl who would grow up knowing their grandfather Antonio's story and understanding that their parents' love had been built on a foundation of truth, forgiveness, and the courage to heal generational wounds. If you believe in the power of love to overcome any obstacle, if this story has touched your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. The wedding took place 6 months later in the community center of the nearly completed Harbor Vista project, surrounded by the families who would soon call the development home. Brooklyn was radiant in a flowing dress that accommodated her growing belly, and Phoenix couldn't stop smiling as he watched his bride walk down an aisle lined with sustainable gardens and community artwork. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two people whose love story proves that the greatest beauty can grow from the deepest pain, that truth has the power to heal any wound, and that love really can overcome every obstacle." Brooklyn and Phoenix had written their own vows, words that reflected their unique journey from strangers in a rainstorm to partners in healing the world. "Brooklyn," Phoenix said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "you saved me long before you gave me a ride in the rain. You saved me by showing me what it means to live with integrity, to build something meaningful with your life, to love someone completely despite their family's mistakes. I promise to spend every day of our marriage proving that I'm worthy of the second chance you've given me. I promise to be the husband your father would have wanted for you, the father our children deserve, and the partner you need as we continue building something beautiful together." "Phoenix," Brooklyn replied, her voice trembling with love, "you gave me back my father's honor and showed me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to build something better from the pieces of what was broken. I promise to love you not despite your family's legacy, but because of how you've chosen to transform it into something healing. I promise to be your partner in creating the kind of developments my father dreamed of, the kind of family that puts love above everything else." When they exchanged rings, Brooklyn felt like she was not just marrying Phoenix, but also healing something that had been broken in her family's story for 12 years. "By the power vested in me by the state of Washington," the officiant announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Phoenix, you may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was witnessed by a community of people whose lives had been changed by their commitment to ethical development, by journalists who'd helped tell Antonio Sinclair's story, and by Brooklyn's mother, who had tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched her daughter find happiness after years of carrying her father's pain. The months that followed their wedding were a whirlwind of final project preparations and pregnancy milestones. Brooklyn continued working on Harbor Vista's design details until her doctor insisted she reduce her hours, and Phoenix split his time between managing the construction and preparing for fatherhood with an enthusiasm that amazed everyone who knew him. "Have you thought about names?" Brooklyn's mother asked during one of their weekly dinners. "We have some ideas," Brooklyn said, sharing a meaningful look with Phoenix. "If the babies are boys, we're thinking about Antonio and Samuel," Phoenix said, "after Brooklyn's father and mine. And if they're girls?" "Sophia and Grace," Brooklyn replied. "Wisdom and blessing. And if it's one of each? Then we'll probably go with Antonio Samuel and Sophia Grace," Phoenix said. "So they'll carry both our father's names and represent the values we want them to understand." Brooklyn's mother reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Your father would be so proud of the life you've built. So proud of the man you've chosen to share it with. I think he would be too. I think he'd love seeing his grandchildren grow up in a community built on the principles he died defending." The twins arrived on a snowy February evening, 6 weeks before their due date, but healthy and perfect. Antonio Samuel Westbrook weighed 5 pounds, 2 ounces, and had his father's dark hair and his grandfather Antonio's serious expression. Sophia Grace Westbrook weighed 4 pounds, 15 ounces, and had her mother's delicate features and what appeared to be her grandfather Samuel's calm temperament. Phoenix wept when he held his children for the first time, overwhelmed by the magnitude of love he felt and the responsibility of breaking the cycle of his family's past mistakes. "I promise you," he whispered to his sleeping son and daughter, "that I will be the father my father never was. That I will teach you that integrity matters more than success, that love is worth any sacrifice, that building something beautiful is more important than building something profitable." Brooklyn watched her husband with their children and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. This was what her father had dreamed of when he'd written about hoping she would heal the world one building at a time. Not just the physical structures she designed, but the family she was creating, the love she was building, the values she was passing on to the next generation. Harbor Vista was completed 2 months after the twins were born, and the ribbon-cutting ceremony drew national attention. The development had become a model for sustainable community building, proving that affordable housing could be both environmentally responsible and aesthetically beautiful. "This project represents more than just sustainable architecture," Brooklyn said during her speech at the ceremony, baby Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms while Phoenix held Antonio. "It represents the power of truth to heal old wounds, the possibility of building something beautiful from the ruins of past mistakes, and the belief that good buildings really do have the power to create hope. My father, Antonio Sinclair, died believing he had failed to protect families from unsafe construction practices. Today, we celebrate a community built on his principles, where every family will have a safe, beautiful, sustainable home. This is his true legacy, not the lies that were told about him, but the values that live on through everyone who chooses integrity over convenience." The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most to Brooklyn was the pride she saw in Phoenix's eyes and the peaceful expressions on their children's faces. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the transformation of pain into something beautiful. 5 years later, Harbor Vista had spawned similar developments across the country. The Antonio Sinclair Foundation, established with profits from the original project, provided scholarships for aspiring architects and construction professionals committed to ethical practices. Brooklyn and Phoenix had expanded their family with a third child, a daughter they named Hope, who had her father's eyes and her mother's artistic sensibilities. Their children grew up understanding their family's complex history, knowing that their grandfather Antonio had been a hero who died too soon, and that their father Phoenix had chosen to honor that heroism rather than perpetuate the mistakes of the past. "Tell us the story again," 5-year-old Antonio Samuel asked one evening as the family gathered around the fireplace in their sustainable home overlooking Harbor Vista. "Which story?" Brooklyn asked, though she knew exactly which one he meant. "The story about how you and Daddy met in the rain." "Well," Brooklyn began, settling baby Hope more comfortably in her arms while Phoenix pulled Sophia Grace onto his lap. It was a very stormy night in Seattle, and Mommy had just finished the most important meeting of her career. "And you saw Daddy standing in the rain," Sophia Grace added, having heard the story dozens of times. "I did. And even though he was a complete stranger, something told me I should help him. Because helping people is what good people do," Antonio Samuel said solemnly. "That's right. And it turned out that helping Daddy led to the most important friendship and then love story of Mommy's entire life." "Even though his family had hurt our family before?" Sophia Grace asked with the directness of a 4-year-old. "Especially because of that," Phoenix said gently. "Sometimes the most important love stories are the ones that help us heal old hurts and build something beautiful from painful memories. Like how you built Harbor Vista to honor Grandpa Antonio," Antonio Samuel observed. "Exactly like that. Love doesn't always come in easy packages. Sometimes it comes disguised as the hardest choice you'll ever have to make. But you made the right choice," Sophia Grace said with certainty. "How do you know?" Brooklyn asked. "Because we're here," their daughter said simply. "And Grandpa Antonio's name is on the beautiful building, and people know he was brave, and you and Daddy love each other so much it makes everything better." Brooklyn and Phoenix shared a look over their children's heads, both thinking about the rainy night that had changed everything. The stranger who had become her salvation, the family enemy who had become her greatest love, the impossible choice that had led to the most beautiful life either of them could have imagined. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Brooklyn and Phoenix stood on their deck overlooking the community they'd built together. Lights twinkled in windows of homes where families were creating memories, where children were growing up safe and loved, where the principles Antonio Sinclair had died defending were living on in concrete and sustainable beauty. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night?" Brooklyn asked, leaning into Phoenix's warmth. "I try not to think about it. The universe needed us to find each other, to heal what our fathers couldn't heal, to build what they couldn't build. Do you think my father would approve of our life?" Phoenix turned Brooklyn in his arms so he could see her face in the soft light from their house. "I think your father is watching his daughter heal the world one building at a time, exactly as he hoped she would. I think he's seeing his grandchildren grow up understanding that integrity matters more than success, that love is worth any sacrifice. And I think he's proud that his daughter chose to forgive rather than hold on to anger, chose to build rather than destroy, chose love over fear." Brooklyn kissed her husband softly, tasting the promise of all their tomorrows in the sweetness of his lips. "I love you, Phoenix Westbrook." "I love you too, Brooklyn Westbrook. Thank you for giving a stranger a ride in the rain. Thank you for saving my life in every way a person can be saved." As they stood together in the community they'd built from love and loss, surrounded by the family they'd created from forgiveness and hope, Brooklyn thought about the young woman who'd stopped in a rainstorm to help someone in pain. She'd had no way of knowing that simple act of kindness would lead to the greatest love story of her life. Sometimes the most important moments look like ordinary choices. Sometimes helping a stranger leads to healing generational wounds. Sometimes love really does have the power to transform the deepest pain into the most beautiful future. The rain that brought Brooklyn and Phoenix together had washed away more than just the dust of an ordinary day. It had washed clean the slate of their family's tragic history, giving them the chance to write a new story built on truth, forgiveness, and the radical belief that love could overcome any obstacle. Their story proves that sometimes the people who seem like our enemies are actually the key to our salvation. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Sometimes giving a stranger a ride in the rain changes everything. If this story has moved you, if you believe in the power of love to heal generational wounds and transform impossible situations into beautiful families, show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Tell me in the comments about a time when helping a stranger led to something unexpected in your own life. Have you ever had to choose between holding on to anger or embracing forgiveness? What would you have done in Brooklyn's situation? This is Mr. Wentworth, and you've been listening to Lux Love Chronicles. Remember that love often finds us in the most unexpected places, wearing the most complicated faces, asking us to be braver than we ever thought possible. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the hardest choices, and sometimes the people who hurt us most are also capable of the most profound healing. Until next time, stay open to the magic of unexpected encounters, the power of forgiveness, and the possibility that your greatest love story might be waiting just around the corner, possibly in the most unlikely place you could imagine. Thank you for joining me for this incredible journey of love, loss, and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will restore your faith in the power of love to conquer all.